everybody. My name is Ben, and welcome to what is UnchartedX podcast number 3, in which I sit down and chat with my good friend Chuck over at the CF Apps 7865 YouTube channel. It's a big channel. Chuck is a great guy. He very generously helped me out when I was first getting started, gave my channel a huge bump. As with my other podcasts, you can find the audio or the MP3 or an RSS feed for this on my website, unchartedx.com. Or you can, of course, watch it right here on YouTube. I will set the video to imagery that matches up more or less with what we're saying. I think Chuck is also going to host this on his channel. So without further ado, please enjoy. Hey everyone, this is Ben from UnchartedX. And I am here today with Chuck from its CF Apps 7865, right? That's the channel name.
You said that correctly, Ben, by the way.
Thanks. How you doing, Chuck?
Very good this morning.
Good. Yeah, sorry this has taken a little while to organise. We've been planning to do a little chat. We've been getting together and talking on Skype, but I kind of live out in the sticks and I'm subject to the vagaries of, rural internet connections. And when your microwave connection doesn't work and you can only get every third word over Skype conversation, it's not the best setup for recording. So
it sounds good today, that's for sure.
Yeah, cool. So we wanted to talk and record it and see if people like this sort of thing. We do tend to talk a lot about history topics. We've both got channels. Obviously, most of you know, Chuck's got a huge following. He's been doing great work on YouTube for a long time now. I've just started up. Yeah, no worries. I've just started up my own channel in recent months, and it's been growing reasonably well.
Reasonably well, come on, Ben. It's been growing by leaps and bounds. You ought to be proud of yourself.
Yeah, thanks. It's the support has been actually really good. I'm happy with where it's going. I've got a whole lot more to work on, and hopefully a lot more content to get started. So,
your videos are always excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have two different philosophies as far as uploading videos. I try to do a bunch of them, and I kind of do them by the seat of my pants. Some of them really quick, and you are meticulous and always perfectly edited, and I admire your work.
Yeah, thank you. I would say the same. I admire your methodology as well. I'm trying to get better at doing, less structured content, something that doesn't take quite so many hours, because some of that stuff, it just sucks the life out of me when you're doing 30 hours of editing trying to get a video over the line, and that's after it's been written. But that's the medium. That's the joy of doing it that way, I guess. There's a price to pay.
And once you do it for 7 years, you kind of get your routine down, and it goes pretty quick and easily, Ben.
Yeah, I'll bet. Thanks. I will get there. But no, I've loved your content as well. In fact, you just have this depth of knowledge that's astonishing to me. I always learn new things on your channel, and in fact, I kind of use your channel as a guide of places to go around and look at. Like, for example, you've got one of the best collections of videos talking about all of the mound sites and all of the mysterious ancient sites that are in the Americas that very few people seem to know about, but you've just covered all of them so well, and I kind of use that stuff as a guide, and I'm using it to plan an actual trip to go out and look at a lot of these sites and try and get some filming done and do a little bit of on-site investigation into them. So,
well,
on behalf, yeah.
You just never know what you're going to find, and I did just a brief series maybe about 3 or 4 years ago on the Ancient Mounds and learned a lot, and then I thought I would look at that subject since I've learned so much over the past 3 years, and that series overwhelmed me. I wanted to document, as many sites as I could, and I think I was up to 100, and wow. I still have some sites I haven't even talked about. So the Ancient America thing is really something that I learned so much just doing those videos, and I know a lot of people are saying, really? That is the history of the United States, and it's no different than any other part of the world, really.
Yeah, that's right. It's buried in mystery. It's an interesting realization at some point when we grow up learning that we think we understand our own history and the history of our civilization and our people, but it's almost like the more you look into these things, the more you realize that's not the case, and that our history is far more complex, and there are far more unknowns to it. It's not just the Americas, there's South America, and of course no end of contradictions and mysteries abound when it comes to places like Egypt and the Middle East.
And now we're learning, the further down we dig, it goes way back in time.
Well, yeah, for sure, in the Americas.
And that's all, unknown stuff that we are just getting into.
That's right. I come at it from an angle of a lot of the adjacent scientific discoveries along with the history as well. I've been fascinated by the work we've done recently to both extend the human timeline and also look at the complexity that's involved in our own genetic history, if you like. We have both been here for a lot longer than we originally thought we had. We've had a much more complex genetic history in terms of our interactions with our now extinct sort of hominid brethren, and we've had this massive cataclysm that's just this huge. I describe it in one of my videos as just this clangor in the story of history that is this massive reset button that we punched, and it's only a reset button we've learned about in the last 20 years.
Right. This age that we are living in right now, we have so much information at our fingertips that really the whole story that we have been fed about history, I just think needs to be wiped clean.
Yeah, me too.
And redone.
You're making great strides in terms of making that happen, that's for sure. It's actually a question I wanted to ask you, is that I know you've been working, producing these videos for, I think you said 5 years now, and I assume you've been interested in the topic for a lot longer than that. I mean, what was it that really first got you interested in these historical mysteries? The first thing that made you realize that, our story of history is so incomplete and full of holes?
Well, I think the first video I made was in 2012, so I think it's been over 7 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which really freaks me out. But I was always interested in history, I guess. I watched a show called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And he went over ancient mysteries. He talked about, ancient astronauts and the Shroud of Turin and all these weird things that no other show talked about.
Right.
So I know I was interested from an early age. And actually, one of the things I've been interested since I was about 15 years old is the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
And I have never even talked about that on my channel. So that's a subject maybe I'll get into one day. But maybe about 10 years ago, I was living in Minnesota, and I finally picked up Fingerprints of the Gods.
Oh, yeah.
And the only reason why that kind of caught my eye is because it sounded like a cool book, and I recognized the author's name, Graham Hancock, only because I read a book of his before he was even doing Ancient Mysteries called The Lords of Poverty.
That's the food and it's the not refugee, but that's the aid story in Africa.
Right. Basically, based in the mid '80s, about the time that what was that concert that came out?
The We Are the World thing.
We Are the World, exactly. So it kind of goes into the problems of that effort, and that was just a great book. I remember just thinking that book was so important, and then when I saw Graham Hancock's name attached to Fingerprints of the Gods, I bought that book, and it was just like everything I wondered and kind of thought about made sense from that book.
Right.
I mean, he wasn't trying to prove anything. He's just in that book saying, hey, there's so much evidence that there was some people around a long time ago, a long time before our history started, that were doing things that we kind of don't even recognize now. So everything he wrote in that book, and it was so comprehensive, so many different sites, that just got me interested. And that came along at a perfect time in my life when I was really looking for something to get involved in, because when I had lived out in Vegas a previous time, I kind of lived a kind of a crazy life and was kind of looking for something to invest my time in, something that wasn't so self-destructive.
Sure.
But so I appreciate Graham Hancock for a lot more than just ancient history, because he got me really interested in the subject. And I was thoroughly offended by what I had been taught in school, and realizing that there is so much more to the ancient world than we have been taught. And when I get offended, that's when I get wordy and chatty.
Determined too, by the sound of it. It's 7 years and an incredible amount of videos. It's great. It's actually a similar story. Again, I pretty much have Graham Hancock to thank in a lot of ways for my interest in this space, and almost the timing's almost a similar timing. You said that was around 2010, 2012 that you picked that up and you were looking at it.
It was about 9 or 10 years ago that I read Fingerprints, and I think I read it in about 4 days. I just couldn't put it down.
Yeah, I love that book also. And I had always had a running interest in history, and it was always something that I had in my life. I guess my mother was a history teacher, one of the high school history teachers, and it was always Orthodox history that she was teaching, but she had a real love and a passion for it that I mean, I guess I picked up on. So shout out to Mum for that. But
Moms are great.
Mums are great. That's right. Yeah, and in fact, it's a lovely story because she's also never travelled. I'm Australian, so it's a long way to go to anywhere in Australia. You're talking about 6 or 7 hours in a plane just to get outside of the country in most cases. And certainly she'd never travelled to any of these sites anywhere in the world. And I, from a young age, just wanted to get out and travel and do things. And that led me, it's a 20-year career in IT. I lived in 3 or 4 different countries. And then later on, I had the chance when Graham Hancock, again, I was a fan of his work, and I think I'd seen him. I was interested in his historical work, and then he went his first appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast at the time, and he opened my mind completely to the concept of entheogens and all of the ayahuasca talk and the whole mystery that lies within human consciousness and the roots of that. That's an entirely different discussion. It's one that I'm also quite passionate about, but I had no idea he was as involved in that as he was. I was purely interested in his historical work, but it fascinated me. So I picked up his other books that he had, his Supernatural and some of the other ones where he talks about that connection. And then I just remember I followed him on Twitter, and at one point he says, "Hey, I'm doing research for this new book, a follow-up to Fingerprints of the Gods," and it was Magicians of the Gods, which I think came out in 2016. But this is 2013, and he was doing research for it. And he said, "But I'm looking to travel with a small group of people through Peru and Bolivia on a research trip," and I was immediately like, "Shut up and take my money," and threw myself at that, and sort of got the chance to meet him and travel with him for a couple of weeks, and also with Brian Forrester. I met Jesus Gamara, who's a local expert in the Cusco region. Him and his father have been studying the architecture there for generations, and
I believe Graham has a section in his Magicians of the Gods book with Gamara, right?
He talks a lot about it. Yeah, he mentions him in his in a couple of his lectures as well as the books. Yeah, and I talk about it in one of my videos too. And Jesus has a really, really good classification system for how to look at a lot of the Andean architecture down there, because there's 3 clear, distinct, different levels of technology or different types of architecture that you can see on most of the sites.
Okay.
And 2 of those being very megalithic and precise, and then the later work kind of being the Inca work. But Jesus has this, him and his father built a whole, I guess, methodology and origin story around it, and some of the concepts in the book I'm not on board with, or I don't, it doesn't seem that likely to me. But his classification system and the way that you can use that to interpret those sites, I think is excellent, and that's the kind of the baseline that I've been using for a lot of my research in those areas as well.
My Magicians of the Gods book is in tatters. I have gone back to that so many times for research. The cover is hanging off. The binding's it's been actually knocked in the pool once.
Oh, wow.
It's all wrinkled, but I kind of wear it as a badge of
honor,
pride, because how many times I've gone back to that book, because it's just an incredible book.
Yeah, I have often thought about doing a reading list or some book reviews, because I've got this little shelf of stuff here that I continually go back to for reference material. And there's stuff in here like Charles Hapgood's Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. I love that. I have yet to do a longer video on some of the ancient maps, and of course Graham Hancock mentioned that in a lot of detail in Fingerprints, the Piri Reis map, the Oronto Phineas map, these ancient maps that show us extremely accurate depictions of parts of the world that were never even discovered at the time. My favorite one is the Piri Reis map that shows not only an accurate depiction of Antarctica, but a depiction of the coastline of Antarctica, the coastline that's under a mile of ice today, and has been under a mile of ice for probably at least 10,000 years.
And I think that was the first video I ever uploaded, was just a little clip of Graham Hancock talking about the ancient maps.
Yeah.
I think that was the very first video I uploaded, but that is a big mystery. We did not discover South America till I think it was 1822. Right. Yet on these maps that are centuries older or copied off earlier maps, South America's detailed pretty good. So that really makes you wonder what was going on, 12,000 plus years ago.
That's right. Yeah, there's a couple of aspects to it that I find fascinating. I mean, there's not just the accuracy of these so-called unknown lands at the time, because as you said, the Piri Reis map and other maps were made from earlier source maps. In fact, in that case, he actually, Admiral Piri Reis, Turkish admiral, I think it was in the 16th century, his handwriting on the map actually tells you that he has drawn this map from other source maps, and these are
Right.
source maps that are lost to us from the Library of Alexandria and things like that, much older maps. And it's really funny that you have the older source map portions that he's drawn from. They've since been verified to be super accurate, but the actual mapping technology that he did and then later the Spanish did, it's far more inaccurate. It just doesn't have this anywhere near the degree of accuracy that these ancient source maps had. It begs the question, like, who was mapping the globe so long ago with this technology that we didn't really invent, the ability to measure latitude accurately until I think it was James Cook's second voyage of discovery, the turn of the 19th century.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just reading on the ancient maps, and it appears that there was a whole bunch of them at the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah.
And at some point, at the time that library was going down, and it didn't get burned all at once, it was kind of a gradual thing. But it seems that somebody took some of the records from Alexandria and brought them up to Constantinople. And some of them were preserved up there because that's where Piri Reis found his maps.
Right.
So somebody was kind of thinking ahead and actually preserving some of the stuff in the library. Some of the stuff, yes.
Yeah. That begs the question of just how much and where is it and who has it. And I think there's a whole lot of stuff that's been pulled out of these, not just the Library of Alexandria, but I think places like Egypt and whatnot have been consistently pillaged and I think a lot of that material has never seen the light of day since. It's probably in some private collections around the place, but I guess that's the game that some people are playing. So.
Yep, and if you were anybody back in that part of the world at that time in history, you went to the Library of Alexandria to study. If you were a royal, if you were a son of a royal,
right,
that was the place to go.
Yeah, that's correct, and that's a long tradition in Egypt as well. Like, this is a point that I always often like to make when talking about the ancient Egyptian civilization, is that that's also where the ancient Greeks, the
Right.
philosophers and their, we talk about all the intellectuals and the advances of the Greeks, but many of those cases, those Greeks went to Egypt to study, and they studied through the religious priesthoods, which were the holders of esoteric knowledge, magical knowledge, which we pretty much would describe today as sort of astronomical knowledge.
Right.
Understandings of the earth and the heavens and the motions of the stars, things like that.
And that really led into the way some temples were built later on. And there was one guy who went to the Library of Alexandria to study, and we know him as the Shroud of Turin man.
Right. Yes.
He was a royal, and he studied at the Library of Alexandria. And I think some kind of myths about where that story went kind of evolved from what he learned there.
Yeah, I've been there to Turin. I've seen. I think they have a replica. I don't think it's the actual shroud. I'm not sure where that is, but I remember being in there and looking at that. That was a long time ago on a trip through Italy. It's an interesting spot, actually, Turin. But
I always thought it was some kind of kooky hoax, and then I looked into it for 4 years and changed my mind a little bit.
Yes, yeah. You have that. You definitely do those in-depth investigations. I do love to see the results of those things.
Well, that was one that just burned my curiosity like nothing other. Because I was finding all this stuff, and I'm saying to myself, well, you have got the story wrong here, and you are going to debunk yourself right now, so you don't waste any more time on this. And then the more I kind of went along with what I was seeing and what I was thinking, I just only found more confirming evidence that I was right. So that was the most fascinating thing I've ever researched by far, just because it's been the total failure of historians to tell us exactly what that relic is.
The whole thing with history, I have an issue with it almost being called a science these days. I am a science. I mean, for what it's worth, I have a Bachelor of Science, and I've always been in computers and IT, so I'm familiar with the scientific method and the way that works, but it's very difficult to directly apply that when we look at history. I often refer to it as like a murder case where the evidence never stops coming in. You're constantly having to readjust your picture of what happened based on this incomplete and often just sketchy set of evidence, and that's what history ultimately is. We're looking at the evidence that we dig up from the ground, and then the evidence of what people wrote down and recorded, and then we have to try and interpret that to put the picture together. And I think somewhere along the line, somewhere between William Flinders Petrie and Zahi Hawass, we've crossed the boundary from this interpretation of incomplete sets of data, and now all of a sudden it's become these hard facts and this doctrine almost that is, this is history and this is how it is and this is how it was and we're the authority on this. And it's really not the case. There's always new evidence coming up, and we should always have an open mind and be open to the idea that new evidence is going to challenge that picture and change that picture. And I think it feels like we're coming up to a turning point of that. Although, to be honest, people have been investigating a lot of these mysteries and been saying that for a long time. But, I have hope that a broader awakening is happening. We have tools like the internet and different mediums where these discussions don't just happen in the halls of academia anymore. They're now out in the public sphere. And, maybe that colors the discourse a little bit. I can almost understand if I was an academic or a historian, somebody whose personal power was derived from my authority over this story, this interpretation. You almost have to be much more aggressive and assertive now in this modern age of discourse on the internet, and we don't have a lot of nuance gets lost in a lot of discourse that perhaps was there in the old academic halls where you're only discussing this amongst your peers. Now it's a lot more assertive, so I think I can understand the change in character somewhat. But I often look back at guys like Flinders Petrie, who was one of the early, really, he did the foundational work in terms of measurement and investigation into sites like Giza, and he didn't know what he was looking at. Like, he was looking at drill cores and these amazing, just evidence of advanced machining that happened back then, and he was puzzled and befuddled by it even then. But
befuddled is a good word, because if you read a lot of those researchers who were there 100, 150 years ago, some of them are absolutely baffled. Some of them are saying, what the heck is going on here, basically.
Right. And
they add little things like they are, totally perplexed.
Yeah. And I that's how I feel about it. When you dig into it, and I don't know why we deny that aspect to this, because for me that's what's attractive about it in a lot of ways. There's this real mystery that sits out there on these sites. It's a real puzzle. Like, you can't, within that orthodox version of history, it's very, very difficult to explain some of the things that we see on these sites. My favorite topic, the boxes in the Serapeum. It just doesn't fit within what we see and what we know of the ancient Egyptian civilization, and certainly none of the tools that are in the archaeological record. Therefore, some of this stuff must exist outside of that. And then when you look at the overall picture with that in mind, and things like cataclysm in mind, the Younger Dryas, things like the extension of the human timeline, all these things, you can start to make a little bit of sense of it. But it's a real mystery, and it's when you go there and you have that in mind, it becomes a fascinating place. It's not this clinical sort of examination of history and looking at the textbooks and we know what everything happened here and it was beer and blankets and copper chisels. It becomes this sort of engrossing mystery that we don't know the answers to, that we have to keep investigating, and maybe we'll find out.
And the mystery even becomes bigger when you listen to the standard Egyptologists try to explain some of those mysteries. And it's, for somebody who's really looked into it and you listen to what they say, you almost feel embarrassed for them.
You do, yeah. Although it's a little hard. I try to dial back it's easy to get outraged, is the way that I feel about a lot of that stuff, because I think everybody knows that a lot of particularly Egypt, but also you can see this happening in South America, but a lot of the management of these places has been it's been mismanaged to some degree. It hasn't.
Plus, there's a story that's been out there that is just set into a lot of people believe what they're told about history.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a big problem.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've seen sort of how that sandwich or how that sausage gets made. This was another story. I mean, again, with Graham Hancock, after that trip in 2013, I had the chance again in 2015. He was still writing, I think he was just about finished writing Magicians at that point. And he's like, I'm going to Egypt. Who wants to come? I'm like, yes, I'd love the experience in South America. I want to do Egypt too. It was a bigger group on that trip. It was actually the first time I'd been to Egypt, was over there with him. And this is what was a lovely part of the story that I didn't finish telling earlier, was that this was also my chance to take my mum on her first trip to Egypt. So she got to come over to Egypt, hang out with Graham as well, get this huge piece of that alternative puzzle. Like I'd been exposing her to his work, and we'd have lots of discussions. And she has an open mind. But she has a great deal of respect for the orthodox version of history, and she was skeptical about a lot of these claims. But she's since absolutely come around. But just seeing her, just because there's an emotional connection when you go to Egypt. These sites really affect you, even if you think you're analytical and you go in. But when you're actually there, and there's an undeniable emotional connection to it, that you can feel the sacredness of these places. And I think this is obviously something the ancient Egyptians also felt. We still use them in that same manner today. But and then that was also the trip that was the infamous Great Debate, right? So Zahi Hawass was on that trip as well in the last couple of days.
Wow. Okay.
And if you go and search Graham Hancock Zahi Hawass, there's clips of this. I'm actually sitting in the audience at this place, but Zahi blew up.
You are?
Yeah, wow. I was there. In fact, I wasn't the person who released the video, but I have the original copy of that video. I was part of the group that got it out at the end. But yeah, he spat the dummy in a massive fashion, because early before they were supposed to do, an hour and a half presentation each, and then do a debate. And Graham was setting up to do his presentation, and flipping through his signs or his slides, and a picture of Robert Bauval pops up, and anybody who knows anything about the history
with the
here,
Orion correlation,
yes,
right?
You're right. Yes, so because Robert and Graham have published books together, and he's done some great work with the Orion correlation. But Zahi saw that and he just lost it. Like he hates Robert Bauval, and there's all sorts of stuff that has been written, that he's written about Bauval, that is in Arabic, that's translated to English, and it's just it's not pretty stuff, and he doesn't like Bauval. So he blew up, and his whole tantrum that he threw is kind of out there on it's all out there on a video. But he refused to watch Graham's presentation. Graham still did it graciously, was excellent. Zahi came in and did his talk, which is interesting in its own, just because it was one long sort of appeal to authority, and just a list of all the celebrities that he's handheld around Giza, and and all the discoveries that he's personally made.
Now, if my memory serves me correctly, he claimed he did not know about Göbekli Tepe.
So that's right. Yeah. So there wasn't much of a debate, but he claimed that he had no idea or no knowledge of it.
And that was just a little while after National Geographic, who he works with, did a special on Göbekli Tepe.
Yes, it was. This is 2015, and it was because that's the thing. It's not. He's like, what's this thing in Turkey you're talking about? We're talking about Egypt, and the big issue, of course, is that was their single biggest refutation of the redating of the Sphinx, was that, if you're saying the Sphinx is 10,000 plus years old based on Robert Schoch's redating of it with the water erosion in the enclosure, he's show us this other megalithic culture that existed in that time, that no such thing exists. Go away with your claim about the Sphinx. Then Klaus Schmidt and the German Archaeological Institute are unearthing Göbekli Tepe, carbon dated, deliberately buried, absolutely verifiable that it is at least 10,000 years old, if not older. I think that's probably, it's likely that was after thousands of years of use, but absolutely undeniably dated to that same period that Robert Schoch's talking about with the Sphinx, and he just sort of waved it off and didn't know anything about it, and he sort of got one of his Egyptologists to say, well, you're two different things, they're two different sites. I'm like, it's not even that far away.
Well, I think Zahi originally got upset when he saw the Orion correlation up on the screen.
Yeah, he did.
Now, Egyptologists, him and Mark Lehner, they only study what they can find in the sand, and they don't look at the stars or archaeoastronomy at all, even though that is an important clear thing to the ancient Egyptians. They show it in their tombs. It's clearly stated in the text, and Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner ignore it completely, and I think that is a total joke.
It is. And so this went on, and there was not really much debate. There's the talk about Göbekli Tepe and some other things. Graham got up. There really wasn't much debate, and he sort of just called it quits after a little while. But yeah, hopefully, that's the positive side of this. I think that the more awareness of these contradictions and of these mysteries, I think the more people are going to wake up to the fact that our history is both more complex and far longer than we've been told.
Right, many layers to it.
There are many layers to it. Yeah, that's the thing. You get to places like Giza, and we look at it, and what we see today, it's hard to keep in mind that is so nuanced. You have what is likely multiple different civilizations and certainly multiple periods of building, and then also thousands and thousands of years of just pillaging and quarrying. I'm fascinated with the stonework aspect of this and the giant megalithic works, but you've got essentially entire cultures using these megalithic sites as quarries for quality building stone and rock for thousands of years.
I think one mistake people do is they look at a site like Giza or Sacsayhuaman in Peru and they say, well, there was an original culture here, and then the Incas came along, or there was an original culture in Giza, and then the dynastic Egyptians came along. Well, I think how many thousands of years is there between that? I think we could have had many different cultures at some of these places that we think maybe there was only, a couple at.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's well and truly more nuanced, and it's funny to me because carbon dating, it cuts both ways. It's often used when it supports the story in the official Egyptologist or Orthodox version of history. They like to use it when it supports what they're talking about, but at the same time they like to ignore it when it doesn't support what they're talking about. And effectively all you're getting with carbon dating could be just the last time someone wearing a loincloth, rolled up to these massive rocks and made a campfire, because that's, it doesn't say anything about the stonework itself. So in a lot of cases, that's where you're getting carbon dates from. It's just from whoever was inhabiting this place. Doesn't relate to its construction. But, on the other hand, you have places like Gunung Padang in Indonesia, which is this giant man-made, or sort of, it's debatable, but this giant structure that's out there in the middle of the Indonesian jungle, sort of pyramidal with this columnar basalt structure. But there's cavities inside it, and Danny Hillman Nadawajaja, there's the geologist actually that was running the investigation into that site before he was shut down by the establishment archaeologists who had never actually been to the site. He actually did some drill cores. He pulled material from within these cavities in Gunung Padang, and you've got carbon dates that go back as far as 25,000 years ago, which is well and truly before the dates for human civilization. And you're pulling this up from a structure that requires civilization in order for it to have even been conceived, let alone built.
That place is very interesting, and it makes you wonder what else is buried in jungles all around, and what else, what is possibly submerged off the coast.
That's right. That's the big story, right? Because you have the South America and the Amazon. This is something that Graham's exposing in his new book, America Before. And you've done an excellent job of mapping and looking into all of the stuff that's emerging from the Amazon jungle as we deforest it. And of course, there's the 400 feet of sea level rise that's happened since the end of the last ice age, which has inundated something like 10 million square miles of land, and this is all land that people would have been living on.
Totally
during that ice age. It did. Yeah, cataclysm's the word. And it's one of my favorite topics as well. But I just don't think we have any real conceived notion of just how bad this cataclysm was. And even the Hollywood movies about giant disasters and things, I don't think they even come close to describing the true brutality of what it meant to be around when the Younger Dryas went down.
Right. I think one of the best sources, and one that people might ignore, is Native American flood myths.
Right.
And some of these go back, to maybe 10, 12,000 years ago, because if you listen to Randall Carlson talk about this, and then you read those North American flood myths, they match.
Yeah.
They really match, and it's almost eerie. And to be a Native American storyteller, you had to memorize those stories word for word, get them exact, or you were not going to retell stories.
Right. Yeah, it's the oral traditions, the oral storytelling traditions, right? Yeah, and this is something when I was doing a lot of this work with Luke on Pugajay, an angle that we took at this, which is, and it goes to the Native American topic, which is this. You have other sources for knowledge, and one of those is these indigenous wisdom keepers that exist and that are a direct lineage almost from these ancient cultures that existed back then. And this is something that really does exist in South America. We traveled. We later on did another trip to South America. Luke and I, we took a few people, and we had with us Elizabeth. I've forgotten her last name, but she was like the right-hand woman to the keeper of the Mayan calendar, which is a traditional play, it's a role that has been kept down. It's sort of that indigenous wisdom keeper and owner of the culture, and it's a title, I think, the keeper of the Mayan calendar, and she worked very closely with him. So as a fountain of this indigenous wisdom and this indigenous knowledge that it's often very symbolic and it's all told in tales, but this is the thing we're learning about religion and lots of these tales. There's gems of truth in amongst all of that, and you stand a lot to learn if you sit down and listen to what these people have to say. And you have a similar parallel in Egypt, right, to Abdel Hakim Ayawan, who has been the source for Stephen Mailer and all of his books, The Land of Osiris, chematology, the whole thing, and I've spent a lot of time with his son Yusuf Ayawan, and this is
very
again
knowledgeable guy, yes,
very knowledgeable. And his father was very well known. He's sadly wested since then, but he's wested, yeah. But he was an indigenous wisdom keeper, and he would give you an entirely different story of history than the orthodox story we've all been told. And all of these things, they're very much worth listening to. They're all part of the puzzle.
I just listened to him speak on, what was that? A couple nights ago, I watched one of Carmen Bolter's Pyramid Code series episodes, and he was on that, and I like what he says as far as how, they knew to move these big stones and how to do things that we really wonder about. I like it when he kind of smiles and just said, knowing is the most powerful thing. Just know. Yes. So they had some wisdom that we have totally lost today, I think.
I agree. Yeah, he talks about these places as sort of sound hospitals and really looks at the concept of acoustics and resonance. And I think these are all, it's funny to me, this vibrational concept and resonance and frequencies and acoustics. In a lot of ways, these are only just emerging disciplines of science. Like we really are only just now starting to get into some of these topics, and this may well be an area that it ties in with my whole perspective on technology. Like we tend to try and solve all of these problems and look at everything from within our own lens of understanding.
That's the mistake we make. Yep.
Right. Yeah, and if we're open to the idea that perhaps there is even whole disciplines and domains of technology, like it doesn't have to look the exact same way that our technology is at this point in time, because for damn sure in 100 years we're going to have a different picture of technology. So there's possible disciplines and domains of technology and capability that exist outside of our perspective, and I think that's where some of the solutions may lie, and I think that's also what is hinted at with some of this indigenous knowledge and the things like that Hakim is saying.
Right. And now, one question I've always wanted to ask you about Egypt: if you're in a site like Abu Sir, and you're kind of walking around the ruins, are you kind of under the impression that you are on top of something? That you are walking around on top of something?
Yes, because there is clearly, and particularly in Abu Sir, because there's absolutely passageways that go down that are completely filled with sand. There is descending passageways in some of the remnants of what were, I think, a small pyramid on that side. I've actually got pictures where you go down. There's another area of Abu Sir that has some water in a descending passageway that goes down. There is an entire. It's all open air now, but it was all an underground structure that has big old boxes and perfect precision granite boxes in it. But yeah, I do. I that's what it feels like, and certainly you're walking on basalt floors and things, and it feels, like Saqqara and Giza. It seems quite likely that there is stuff that's underneath the sand here. Mm-hmm. Why is that? You have some idea about?
Well, I was watching one of your and Ben's videos. I think it was when you were in Abu Sir.
Yep.
And it just seemed like everything around you, it just looked to me like, God, I wonder if they feel like they're just on top of something. That's just the way it looked to me out of my mind's eye.
Yeah. Well, and so there's a rumor, there's the sister site to Abu Sir quite nearby is Abu Jarab. And
Yes.
this is a sun. This isn't even a pyramid; it's a sun temple site. Was supposedly the base for one of the biggest obelisks in the place. But there is an Abu Ghraib. It's much smaller than Abu Sir, right nearby, and absolutely just. But it contains some of the most amazing artifacts that I've ever seen in Egypt. So not only has it got those really mysterious crystal bowls. I mean, bowls. They're alabaster,
Alabaster,
quartz, whatever. Amazing bowls, but it has this huge hotep that is all made from alabaster as well. And in the center of this hotep is this huge circular plug that's got to be a meter or two across in the center. You can lay down on it, and this is a real weird. It's an interesting feeling to lay down there at sunset and just lay on top of this thing that's immeasurably ancient. And it's clearly precision engineered. There are tubular hole drill marks in this object. There are circular saw and real straight cuts, and the surfaces have been cut. But a story that Yusuf always told me is that giant circular plug on top of that hotep is actually the entrance to a tunnel system that runs underneath that whole area. And that was for whatever reason, but that's why that's on top of that. He's not sure, but that's what he told me about it.
Now those big alabaster, I don't even know what the description of them, but they're like tubs.
Yeah, cogs
at
almost.
Abu Ghraib. Now the standard line on those is they are basins where animals were sacrificed and the holes let the blood drain out. I thought that was a little strange.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because you're right. They do have holes in them that would not let the bowls fill up very much because you have these like 4-inch, again, straight precision cut holes in the side of these blocks and a very strange pattern on them. I mean, they almost look like cogs to me. These giant cogs. I know when I put this video together, I'll definitely put some footage of these in here. It's a very strange design. They're cut out of these giant square blocks of alabaster. And they've all been moved around on the site. I think they were trying to take them to a museum and then decided they were too heavy, so they just left them out at Abu Ghraib. But there's a whole bunch of them. There's also a bunch more of them around the side of the base for the obelisk, and these aren't quite the same as those. They're more smoother. They don't have the cog-like protrusions on them. They're just round circular bowls, but they do also have a drill hole in them.
Do you know what alabaster represented to the Egyptians?
No.
I did some reading where I know red granite represents like fire and limestone represents water.
Right.
But I just can't remember what alabaster. I mean, the fact that they use alabaster has to be significant and with purpose.
Yeah, it's not an easy material to work. It's a brittle material, and it's easy to mess it up and make that. So, do you know that at the Valley Temple, in the Valley Temple where you roll up to the Sphinx, that there are 2 doorways on the side of that, and these doorways are always shut, and they've got mesh put over them. But these 2 doorways, either side of the passageway that leads up to the Sphinx, they're all alabaster on the inside. They're massive, as the rest of the temple is granite. There's granite and limestone. There's basalt even in the Valley Temple. But these closed off passageways to the side are all alabaster. It's incredible.
Alabaster, really?
Yeah, big blocks. And I do have footage of them because there was a hole in the door and I jammed my little camera through there, and once the light adjusted, you could clearly see all the alabaster blocks in the walls contrasted to the granite that was there as well. So yeah, the
Valley Temple is pretty unique.
Oh, isn't it great?
I think the Osirian, right, is the only thing that compares.
I think so, right. That's the Assyrian in terms of just the pure megalithic nature of it. Between that and, I guess, the King's Chamber, but that's buried inside a pyramid.
I have a few videos with John Anthony West down there that really gives you the idea of how precise that Valley Temple was put together.
Yeah, it's astonishing. I was just recently rewatching The Revelation of the Pyramids, which is Jacques Grimalt's, I think, his unpublished work. It's based on that. That has some very good evidence for showing you how not only it wasn't a random selection of shapes in these megalithic blocks with you have this sort of mirrored pattern that goes on both sides, and it's just a real unknown as to how or why they did that. It can't have been easy, working with these giant blocks, but B, trying to replicate the same pattern from one side of the wall to the other is just why.
Why? And the way they kind of turn And
Yeah.
the clip that I have uploaded on my channel with John Anthony West in a group down there, thanks to another channel that let me use some of his videos, but he had a construction worker or architect with him down in the Valley Temple, and the guy was totally perplexed, and he just plainly said, "We could not do this today."
Yeah. I would agree. It's
As
so,
far as setting them.
yeah. Yeah, right. Setting them in place so precisely. It's just mind-boggling, because I don't think it's hard for your everyday person to really get an appreciation for just how difficult that is. Like to carve those surfaces and have them be so precisely matched, and then placing that stone in just the right place, such that you just can't fit. There's no imperfection in the joins, and you can see in some cases where the joins are just so precise you can barely even see them.
Yeah, I just happened to watch these construction workers down on the Strip. They're building a new bridge overpass.
Oh yeah.
And some of those, I asked the guy, and some of those pieces of the bridge are like 25 tons. And they are just struggling like mad to get this, into the base and into the, and they're using a crane down there for 20, and the Egyptians or whoever was throwing around 150-ton blocks like it was nothing. No, how did they do that?
Yeah, that's a real mystery. There's a really interesting discussion that Christopher Dunn goes into this when you're looking at the Serapeum, because you've got these giant boxes and other artifacts that are all carved from single pieces. I've seen pictures of people trying to put a 20 or 30-ton block on the back of a truck and literally breaking the truck trailer in half. Like just transporting these things is not a easy task for us, and we have diesel engines and hydraulics, and we have cranes that can lift 1,000 tons. But
a lot of these things need counterbalances put in them just to be able to do it. That's
right. Yeah, it's an astonishing achievement. In any case, the more you learn about it, this is why I enjoy the opinions of guys like that construction worker, and anyone who's an architect or an engineer, or anyone who has a grasp on the practicalities of trying to do this work. I really think those are the types of people that we should be looking to for an authoritative stance on what this would have taken. Because I mean, I do want to be clear that our Egyptologists and archaeologists do a great job in terms of understanding the ancient cultures that we know about. It's what they're there to interpret. But when it comes to engineering and construction, they're not experts in that realm. And quite often they just don't look at those aspects of these buildings. They look at, like, what was the symbology related to this? What was written on the walls? How did people use this? They don't really look at how did they build it.
I think somebody went down a whole different path than what we went down. As far as technology and machinery, I think they were more into knowledge and some aspect that we just don't think of today, because we need to burn energy and
Yeah. I describe it as they had a mastery over natural materials that is unsurpassed. And I look at how we do technology today. Like, so we think if we were to build something like a skyscraper, we manufacture precision materials. We look for lightweight, easy to use steel composite materials. We do that because we need it to be lightweight and we need it to be strong. But if you have the ability to work with natural materials like stone, some of the hardest types of stone, and to do that without the effort that it takes us, which certainly seems like they had that capability, then you don't have any need to build composite materials. You don't need to make all these other types of advanced materials if you have a mastery of the natural environment. And we know what lasts longer too, right? This is the reason that the Great Pyramid's still there and our skyscrapers in 1,000 years won't be, is because these natural materials last an awful lot longer. And if you have the ability to work with that and to create these solid structures from natural material like that, then you don't need to make space-agey materials. You can extend the analogy. I like to extend it all the way to shooting up into space. So we're 1,000 years from now, we're a race that's into the heavens, where space travel's a thing. We're all up there doing it. We're making spacecraft. Same methodology stands. We need these lightweight materials. We need to make these craft. But if you could advance your technology to such a degree that you have mastery over the cosmic forces themselves, then you wouldn't be making spaceships. you would be
Right.
making things like small planets. You would be making things like the moon. If you could
The
control...
moon is a
Yeah,
the
right.
moon is a whole different show.
That's a different kettle of fish, I know. And it's... But if you alter, you take that technology discussion far enough, and all of a sudden, if you can control gravity, and you could, you've got the ability to pull together a lot of that sort of natural material. Now you don't need to make this other material. You can use natural forces and natural materials to get what you want. It's all about perspective on technology and having an open mind, I think.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that's probably at the end of our time for today to chat. But thanks for talking, Chuck. That was great.
No problem. I think we make a pretty good team. You have been to these places, and I have looked at these places from overhead and read about them, and I don't know. I think we have a lot of good things to discuss.
I think so too. Yeah, your knowledge is kind of scary. It's a little intimidating to talk to you about this stuff. You know so much about so many of these things. It's crazy.
I think part of the reason why I can look at sites today that maybe not 5 years ago is because I have looked at so many ancient different cultures and so many periods of history that now when I look at a site, I'm kind of making my own determinations instead of relying on what other people say.
Right.
And a lot of cultures looked at things very, very much in the same way. And I just think from looking at a whole bunch of different places and different periods of time, it's really benefited my overall knowledge.
Yeah, well, you're benefiting the overall knowledge of an awful lot of people, and thank you for doing that. It's
thanks,
excellent.
man.
Yeah, I try to watch all of your stuff, and I've been working my way through your back catalog slowly. You're a fountain of knowledge, Chuck, so that's great.
I appreciate that, and your channel is going to keep on growing by leaps and bounds because you put out some of the best videos on YouTube as far as ancient history. And I'm glad people are recognizing that.
Yeah, thank you. And for those that are interested, you can get at me at UnchartedX.com and, of course, right here on the YouTube channel.
Maybe someday I'll have a website.
I can help you with that. It's the sort of
I
thing I do.
need help. I'm a technical idiot.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately cursed with the ability to make all that stuff mostly work. So, and speaking of that, for the audience out there, if you guys like this, please let us know. Leave a comment with your thoughts below. And, there's a possibility that we'll do these in a live stream at some point in the future so that we can interact with everyone out there. And if you like that idea as well, please let me know.
Sure. That sounds like a good deal, Ben.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Chuck, and we will do this again.
Yes, we will. I will talk to you real soon.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.